You found the Backup Wrap Up, your go to podcast for all things backup, recovery, and cyber recovery. In this episode, we explore the recent wave of consolidations in the backup industry and the potential dangers that consolidation can have in your environment. We discuss major acquisitions like Cohesity buying Veritas, Salesforce acquiring Own Backup, and a few others, and what these mean to customers. We also examine the risks of keeping legacy backup systems running after a migration or consolidation, including security vulnerabilities and ongoing costs. We also talk about a solution to those concerns. A lot's going on right now, and we're making sure that you're up to date. By the way, if you don't know who I am, I'm W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup, and I've been passionate about this topic for over 30 years, ever since I had to tell my boss that there were no backups of the really important database that we just lost. I don't want that to happen to you, and that's why I do this podcast. On this podcast, we turn unappreciated backup admins into cyber recovery heroes. This is the Backup Wrap-Up. Welcome to the show. If I could ask you to take just a quick moment and click subscribe or follow whichever platform you're using. And remember, you can watch us on YouTube or you can listen to us on your favorite podcast platform. And I am, of course, W. Curtis Preston, aka Mr. Backup. And I have with me what I believe to be a brand new co-host. I don't recognize him at all, Prasanna Maliandi. How's it going, Prasanna? I think you are indeed Prasanna, correct?
Yeah, I'm not an AI clone, so that's a good thing. And like you said, for people who want to see the new me, go check out our YouTube feed.
First, you need to go watch the old him from a previous episode, and then you watch the new you.
Yeah, I decided it was time. So I had been growing out my beard and my hair for 4.5 years.
Yeah. So you had a feared. I think the fact that it, because you had a tweered, then a theered, then once it became feared, I think it was time to fear it.
Yes, exactly. It was time for it to go. So that was gone. And then I figured at the same time, might as well cut my hair. So I had started growing out my hair because I was like, okay, at the end of all of this, I want to donate my hair. Right. So you can donate it to organizations where they'll make wigs for people with like cancer or who've lost hair due to treatments. And so I donated to a organization called Wigs for Kids.
Yeah. Nice.
And I donated, I think it was like 22 or 23 inches.
It's just crazy.
So I hope it'll make a nice wig for a child.
The funny thing is that I'm pretty sure I've told you, I've never had my hair as long as you have your current hair right now in my life. And then, so trying to relate to you having your hair basically down to your butt, like I couldn't fathom that. But, well, I welcome the new you to the, you do look like a completely different person. It's really kind of funny.
It's actually very light also. Like, it doesn't feel like there's something on my head, like hair, people would think it's like fairly light, but when you have that much hair.
Yeah. That is funny. Speaking of like lightening the load, we're going to talk about like an interesting concept, I think, this week. We're taking a break from the ransomware series because there was once again an announcement today of yet again another backup consolidation, consolidation of the backup industry. So let's talk about some of the ones that we've heard about in the last few months.
Yeah. And I think one thing, Curtis, it's important to understand is a lot of these companies, when they start out, they're like, oh, we're going to do one particular workload really, really well.
Right.
And they make great inroads on that one particular workload. But then the challenge becomes most customers don't just want 20 different backup software or backup in their environment.
Yeah.
And so that's why you're also starting to see, hey, this company did a great job with this one particular workload. Let's acquire them, beef up our portfolio, and offer that to our customers along with the rest of the package.
Yeah, I think when I look at the list of companies, and we'll talk about the actual list in a minute, I do think that um, like each of them sort of picked a workload. Actually, when I look at the list, there's different ones here for sure. There are different types. There are some that are the way you described, and then there's at least one
Yeah.
that is kind of a really big deal in terms of the way that the way this whole thing went down, and they definitely don't qualify that for the type of thing.
Yeah.
So let's talk about and I think just again before we get to the list, if for the companies that picked one workload, kicked the butt out of that workload, and then got acquired by somebody that wanted that workload, good on them, right?
Yep.
They didn't shoot for the moon. They didn't try to boil the ocean. And then they got acquired. And maybe, you could argue that maybe the payday isn't as big if they don't boil the ocean successfully. And then, but it's an actual payday.
Well, and I think also it's not just building the product, it's also selling it, right? And
Yes.
I think as a smaller company, having that sales force who can go out and touch all of these customers becomes really difficult and expensive.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, let's talk about the products first. We'll talk about,
Okay.
let's just list them first.
Yeah.
And why don't you talk about the
The
first one, I
oldest?
think, that started this whole
Yeah.
thing?
Yeah. So, and by the way, all of this is just this year, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's
This
not,
year for sure. Yeah.
yeah. So the first one, which I think kind of astounded a lot of folks, was Cohesity acquiring Veritas.
Yes. Specifically, Cohesity. Well, I would call it Cohesity acquiring most of
Part of.
Veritas,
Yeah.
which was interesting. We'll talk about that. Um, and then we have, and I don't know, I think it's in this order. And then we have Salesforce, and this is a really interesting one. Salesforce acquiring Own Backup.
I think they're
Um,
called own software now,
Own
but yes.
Software, yeah. Well, it was Own Backup,
Yeah.
I think, was the product,
Yeah.
and then Own Software. And then we have Veeam acquiring Alcyon, which is one I
Yep.
missed. I don't know how I missed that one.
Yeah. That was a
Um,
couple of weeks ago. And then today, the big one that came out was
yeah,
Commvault acquiring Clumio.
Clumio, yeah, and these are all companies that I've had something to do with over the years. None of which, just double checking, none of which I've actually worked for, but I've worked with them.
Yeah.
Talked to them. Aware of them, and the and when you look at this list, three of them are what I would call startups, right? Basically they created a company to do a thing, and
Hmm.
then they got acquired, hopefully to do the thing, right?
Yeah.
And then there's Veritas, which is very different than that.
That was a very surprising move because I would argue that Veritas is probably now they're probably number three in terms of backup market.
I actually don't have up to date numbers on that. They've certainly gone down the list in terms of if we look at new
Yeah.
product. It's kind of like you and I both own Teslas, and for a while there, like the Model Y was the most popular
Yeah.
car in the world, but that doesn't mean that it's the most popular car on the road,
Yeah.
right? Certainly, Veritas became less popular as a new product over the last few years,
Yeah.
and but I think that they still had due to, and that's I think what we're going to end up talking about at the end of the episode here, due to the stickiness of
Yeah.
backups, they were still in a huge amount of um,
Yeah.
environments.
I would say that it's the saying that like you never get fired for picking vendor X,
Yeah, yeah,
right? Because they're the stable one, they're the mature
yeah,
ones, they're the ones that everyone uses. I would say Veritas was probably that vendor
yeah. It
for the
was.
longest time.
Yeah, and they
Yeah.
were when I was using it like all the time. They were that
Yeah.
product, right? They were the one that
They had the breadth, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So let's talk about for those that don't follow it the way that you and I
Hmm.
do. Let me just describe Veritas. Veritas, I would put like Veritas, Commvault, TSM, ArcServe, Networker. These were. Did I forget any from? Well, like Data Protector.
Yeah.
These were what I would call what we would now probably call legacy backup products. That doesn't mean that they're old. It just means that they were from a time when if you were a backup product, you did everything, right?
It was like
You
wave one of backup products.
they were, yeah. And this is what I grew up on. And the some of that initial wave, these companies are gone. My first commercial backup product was actually called SMARC,
I remember you
which
telling me about that.
which is
Yeah.
funny because, and you may recall that I now that I've learned things, I don't like that they call themselves SMARC.
Yeah.
They should have been called SM back, but but I digress. Um, because archive is not backup. But
Yeah.
and by the way, SMARC and Veritas, they were from the same town up there in Minneapolis, or well,
Mm,
nearby.
yeah.
They were from a suburb of Minneapolis, both of them. But Veritas, back in the day when there were like 37 different flavors of Unix and Windows, and how many different database products there were. There were like three big ones: Informix,
Yeah.
Oracle, Sybase. Then you added to that SQL Server, um, and these were the guys that they did every flavor of Unix. They
Yep.
did every flavor of database. And
Mainframes too.
what's that?
Mainframes,
And well, actually, I don't
right?
think they did
Did they
mainframe.
never touch mainframes? Was it
I don't think
always
so.
open
This was
systems?
this was sort of the open systems backup world.
Yeah.
The mainframe folks, kept to them
Had their
kept
own.
to themselves, right? They also didn't do VMS, as I
Yeah.
don't think. I don't think
Which is weird, right?
any of the new. Well, we were kind of killing it off. It was like you
Yeah.
didn't want to do mainframe, you didn't want to do VMS. Just like, and I'll tell you a story. Um, Again, back when I was very
Back in the
new,
day, I
back in
think
the
we need
day.
like
Well,
I think we need some music for that. If you could
yeah.
edit that in, Curtis.
um, like when I was brand new in backup, there was a VMS box in the data center. And for 2.5 years that I spent at this company, I said the following. I don't even have a login to that. I don't, oh, you need VMS backups?
Go talk to the admin.
Yeah, you need to talk to this guy. And Ron Rodriguez, the guy whose job I took, but I didn't know anything. I knew Unix, but I didn't know anything about VMS. And I was like, yeah, if you need VMS backups, you got to go talk to to Ron. Yeah, for 2.5 years, I said I nobody even gave me a login. I don't know, but so VMS was still kind of weird. But Veritas Net Backup Exec was much more
Different.
a
Yeah.
Windows centric product, right?
Like an
Um,
SMB mid-market
yeah,
product.
yeah, exactly. And Veritas acquired Backup Exec from Seagate Backup 100 years ago, and they were going to merge the two products. That never that never happened.
Sometimes it's better never to merge.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure they gave it the old college try, but that just didn't happen. That was what they did. Was they did just literally everything, and then they continued to add new workloads as they came. Right when VMware came out, when
PHV,
Hyper-V came
Nutanix.
out, when the
Yeah.
cloud came out, when they did their best to add all the new. Oh, and by the way, you also in that backup world, you also had to support every kind of tape library, every kind of deduplication target,
And they also built their own deduplication, if I recall, as
they
well,
did
right?
build their own dedupe. That was the way it was because the backup environments were that way.
Yeah.
I would go into environments and they go, well, we've got 37 Solaris boxes, 15 AIX boxes, 12 HPUX boxes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And if you didn't check every one of those boxes, you wouldn't get that deal.
Yep.
And we've now completely consolidated that world, right? It's now basically Linux and Windows.
It's because production has been consolidated,
Yeah,
your
yeah,
backup environments have also been simplified.
yeah, yeah. And so, but all those workloads are still around,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
right? I mean, that's a beautiful thing about Unix. Most of these versions of Unix haven't had new code written for them for more than a decade, and they're
Yeah.
still running just fine, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so products like NetBackup, Networker, TSM, and the fact that they covered all those old products, they continue to have a market,
Yeah,
but not a new market, right?
yeah. Because that's not where all the new workloads are going, right? It's
Yeah,
when customers move to first virtual machines and then when they move to the cloud, right? It's like, "Oh, why do I need the same infrastructure and the same," and it also, I think, comes back to, why do I have to manage those backups the same way
yeah,
when the way I manage production in the cloud is very different than how it
yeah,
was on premises?
exactly. So they just became, a lot less
Yeah.
popular, and so Cohesity, which is a
I'd probably say
uh,
that's wave 2.
yeah, that's wave two. Yeah, sort of that the consolidated
Yeah. Integrated data protection appliance.
Cohesity Veeam. Well, Veeam, I'd say Veeam. I put Veeam like right at the beginning of that second wave where it was Windows centric, disk centric, disk only, really,
Yeah.
right? They're like tape. What's tape, right? They only added tape after massive customer demand to do that.
I would say Avamar is in that wave as well.
Avamar is in that wave as well. Yeah.
Yep. Rubric,
Um,
Cohesity,
Yeah, and
Veeam.
they've gotten a lot of traction, right?
Yep.
Cohesity, and but I think, and we can talk all day about what exactly they were thinking when they
Mm.
acquired NetBackup. What's their plan there? I have zero inside knowledge. I am 100% convinced that the answer is they ultimately want to
Customers?
turn as many customers of NetBackup into Cohesity customers, right?
Yeah.
And by that I mean customers of the new platform.
Yeah. It is interesting that they didn't acquire all of Veritas,
Well,
though.
that's the thing, right? So what did they left behind? Didn't they leave
eVault,
behind
right?
Backup Exec and Enterprise Vault?
Yeah.
Which is, I don't know.
Yep.
I don't know.
Mm.
I understood the Enterprise Vault part. I didn't understand why they didn't bring Backup Exec. I'm sure there's reasons that I'm not privy to, but these are two very different products. Backup Exec,
Yeah.
as we talked about, it's a workload
I d
centric product.
Yeah. I do also wonder if maybe Cohesity thought that they already have that covered with their existing product,
Yeah,
or maybe it might be also a go-to-market, like if their
yeah,
sales team is
yeah,
not capable of having that as a channel.
yeah. And so then, yeah, so basically, Enterprise Vault, which is an archiving product, right, and Backup Exec, which is a Windows centric backup product, those stayed, and they're forming a new company which currently doesn't have a name. They're
I
calling
thought it's called New
it
Company, isn't it?
they call it Dataco,
Oh, Dataco.
which cannot possibly be the new. I mean, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it'll be Dataco. We'll see. There have been weirder named companies, but anyway, so we got that coming out. We got to talk about these
What comes
others.
next? Yeah.
Let's talk about Salesforce
I
acquiring
know this is your
own.
favorite.
What's that?
Oh, I know this one is your favorite topic to talk about with Salesforce backup.
Yeah, yeah, because Salesforce. it- yeah, I mean, it's such an important database for so many people, and the fact that they don't back it up,
Yeah.
that the
Well,
vast majority of them don't back it up, just kills me, right?
I think you should talk also. I know we've had past episodes, but sort of like their attempts to do backup, right? Salesforce to
Yeah.
do backup.
Yeah, they've had like two. So for the longest time, they kind of back up all of your data, but if you need it, it costs if you need it to do a restore, it was $10,000 to do a restore. It was it was like 4 to 6 weeks expected delivery time and zero expectation of recoverability. Like literally this is all in the contract, right? So it's like they're like you didn't pay to back it up, so we just designed it in a way that was easy for us to back up, and we don't really care whether or not you restore. That was it was the
And then they killed
craziest
it off
thing.
though, right?
What's that?
And then they killed it off at one point, right? They said, we're
Then
not even
well
going to
they
offer it.
came out with their own backup product, which as I recall, they pulled and then they brought back.
Mm,
They had some attempts of coming. I think what they saw was that a number of companies, like our former employer Druva, a number of companies had got some success with backing up Salesforce, and they're like, "Hey, I think maybe we're leaving money on the table."
yeah,
Ultimately, I think it apparently they ultimately said, "This is too hard. We're just going to go buy somebody
yeah.
that." Um,
Well, and I think that own software was sort of the leader
yeah,
in the Salesforce backup space.
yeah, yeah. And so that's very much like what you talked about in the beginning, right? Is that here's a product, they just do Salesforce backup, and Salesforce is like, let's buy one of those, easy peasy, lemon squeezy. And so that I and by the way, we're not talking too much about like the number, like the acquisition numbers and whatnot.
Yeah,
That's not really the point here. But that's a perfect one where you just basically obviously you're a Salesforce customer, or you wouldn't be using it, and then and now now you're just sending your checks to a different place. That's an easy one because there's not really any. It's not like when earlier when we talk about Veritas acquiring Backup Exec. There's this like integration thing.
yeah,
Zero integration. It's already integrated. You just send your checks to a different place, right?
yep,
Maybe your
and
call
you get all
center
the
moves.
benefits.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. That one made a perfect sense.
So the next one to that came up, I think this was actually 2 weeks ago or a week ago from this recording date, was Veeam acquiring Alcyon.
Right.
So I used to actually work with the co-founder of Alcyon
Yeah.
way back in the day.
Yeah.
His prior startup was actually one that was focused solely on Kubernetes backup
Right.
called Kasten, which was
Yeah.
then acquired by Veeam.
Yeah.
He spent some time at Veeam and then he's like, hey, I'm going to go do something new. So he left Veeam and then he started Alcyon.
Yeah.
And Alcyon was a Microsoft 365 backup solution,
Yeah. And
right?
this is that perfect thing, just like you said, of where they
Yeah.
just we're just going to do this one thing. And what I remember about Alcyon is that what they focused on was ease of installation and ease of
Yep.
use, right? Rather than we're going to be the fastest or we're going to be the most complex or the
Yep.
most feature rich. They said we want to like have you click a
Mm.
couple of buttons and then you've got yourself 365
Yep.
backup.
Yeah. And I know, at least looking at a bunch of their blog posts and other things, right? They were also very focused on ransomware protection,
Yeah,
right? And making
yeah,
sure that that is all secure. So I
yeah.
think it totally makes sense. Like Veeam was like, hey, we've already worked with this company, with a lot of the folks before. They have a solution that is doing well in the market, right? Let's bring it in house, leverage the Veeam uh, selling machine,
Right,
right? To
right.
get this out to our customers as well.
Yeah, and I'm trying to remember. Veeam had this is sort of like the Salesforce story where Veeam had tried creating their
Yeah.
own 365 backup, and the product was out there, it was selling, right? But I think they took a look at what Alcyon had done and said, "Yeah, we like this
Yeah.
better, so
Yeah.
we'll just buy it."
Yeah. And I know Veeam has done this in the past. For instance, when they did their cloud backup, so like AWS backup, they had built their own and then they had acquired N2WS, if you
Yeah.
remember back in the day, Curtis.
Yes.
And then I think they eventually built their own after that. So,
Yeah, the N2WS thing was sort of a Charlie Foxtrot, I would call it,
yeah.
because it was a good product. It was well known, and they bought it, and then basically the government customers of N2WS didn't like the Russian sort of aspect
Connection.
of
Yeah.
Veeam that was present at the time, which I believe they since
Yeah.
addressed,
Yeah.
but they had to like sell it off right after they bought
Mm.
it, and then
Yeah.
they came out with their own.
Yeah.
But then they decided, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And it's
Um,
interesting also, just sticking with Veeam. I'm just waiting for the time when because you know that the Veeam co-founders went and started their own startup,
right.
right? The Utbi, I
Utpi,
think.
Utpi.
Yeah. Right. So it's just a matter of time because they're building immutable storage specifically for Veeam. My
Right,
guess is at
right.
some point they may get acquired as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
Mm.
What are you and I not? Why we should be making some
Something for
product
Veeam.
for Veeam. Um, the well, it's actually, I actually currently do work for a company that is working with Veeam. So maybe, hey, who knows? Maybe we'll get acquired by Veeam.
Before we go to the next one, so like you were saying, I think the last one, right, with Salesforce acquiring own software, I think with this one, with Veeam acquiring Alcyon, it makes sense because here's a product which does really well in their space.
Yeah,
It makes sense with our existing product portfolio because we either have a gap or our customers are demanding it. We'll acquire them, bring it in house, and then hopefully they still continue to flourish,
yeah,
even while being part of the larger organization.
right. Now the final one is it's brand new. It literally just came out this morning, right?
Yep.
As of the date we're recording it, which is September 25th. But this one doesn't appear to be as good of a story as the other ones. Commvault acquiring Clumio. And I say that because the number, and I know we said we were going to talk about numbers, but it's kind of all we know about it at this point, is that they were acquiring it for $47 million, which is like a fifth of the invested money
Yep.
in Clumio, which means that's not a success story.
Yep.
Which means generally that they're acquiring it for reasons that we don't quite understand.
Yeah.
We also
And
understand they're acquiring part of it, kind of like the
yeah.
Cohesity one, right?
Yeah, they said
Um,
they were acquiring some assets.
some
We
assets.
we
Yeah.
don't know what those assets are or which
Yeah.
parts they're taking
Yeah.
from that.
And I competed against Clumio when I was at Druva, and I remember looking at it, and I remember certain aspects of it I really
Yeah,
liked. Um, and um, and I
I remember the
remember,
SQL backup for the
yeah,
way they did SQL
yeah, the
backups.
way
I
they did
remember
SQL
it.
backup, that was, that
Yep,
was a big one. And I do remember having kind of a feeling that I felt they were kind of trying to boil the ocean,
yep,
which is kind of, it's kind of easy to do in the backup world because there's so many different backup problems to
yep,
deal with. And but yeah, I don't think ultimately they boiled that ocean.
yeah,
What we don't yet know is we don't know what they've acquired. Um, we don't know what's going to happen to existing customers, et cetera. Right.
yeah.
But
I could see
yeah,
just
go ahead.
speculation. It would be interesting if what they acquired was mainly sort of their deduplication engine that runs in the cloud.
Mm,
Because as you know, right, Commvault has their metallic surface
yeah.
service, right?
Yeah.
But from everything I've heard, it's not very scalable. And my guess is it's sort of been more of a lift and shift. Now, this was a while ago. Maybe things have changed.
Yeah. I don't think so.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Benefit of the doubt,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I'm guessing maybe they're looking at this as a way to sort of re-architect their backend to
Yeah.
become more efficient and scalable.
It is, yeah, because that was the other thing that I remember was really cool about Clumio, is that they really were into like the latest gen of like serverless computing and things like
Yep.
that, even more so than Druva was at the time. I remember thinking that, although we had been in the cloud much more, and it's like
Yeah.
we're well aware of serverless computing. We use serverless computing where it makes sense,
Yep.
right? And we were possibly too big and doing too many backups to certainly to use serverless for everything,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
But that, but I know that you're right. My understanding is that you're correct, right? That with Commvault, it's basically the, like, if you look at how they describe the product, it's basically Commvault just running in the cloud, and
Yeah.
that's why they have such feature parity between the two products. I do not believe, and anyone can feel
Yeah.
free to correct me.
Mhm.
I do not believe it's a rewrite for the
Yeah.
cloud.
Yeah.
Um,
But I think the biggest thing is I know you mentioned earlier sort of Veritas when they bought Backup Exec,
yeah,
right? I think the question is how difficult is it to integrate this technology if that's what they bought it for into their
yeah,
existing stack?
yeah.
That's
And
always the
and
biggest
and by the way,
challenge.
what could be the case with Clumio is that they're like, we're buying this backup piece, and maybe there's some skunkworks project that we don't know about, and they're like, yeah, you
Yeah.
don't get this one. This one's my new pet project. I'm going to go work on that now.
Yeah.
Whatever that, who knows? Who knows what it is? I think we have a nice segue into this idea of when backup products get acquired, when companies get acquired, when you have consolidation of any kind, you often have um, old backup products that get left by the wayside, right? Or backup installations that get left by the wayside. You were, I'll just make up something. You were a net backup customer, and then Cohesity acquires net backup, and then your worst fears are realized. And I'm just making up a story here. Your worst fears are realized, and you get a letter that says we're shutting down net backup, and you have to move, right?
Yeah. Or the
And
cost becomes so prohibitive, right?
yeah,
That you're like, I need
that's another thing. You get told that like you have to upgrade to something because the licensing and
yeah.
and so what happens? By the way, I apologize
Hypothetical.
to Cohesity. Like, I'm not saying
Yeah.
that's what you're going to do. I'm just saying I needed to make up a story, and you were in the list. But the concern, and I made a LinkedIn post this morning that was talking about this problem of legacy backup solutions, and I wanted to talk about how big of a deal it is to have a backup product just sitting around that you're not really using anymore. Why would they have it sitting around? Why don't they just shoot it in the head?
Pull an office space, I think was what my comment was.
Yeah. Why don't they just pull an office space on the backup system? Why don't they do that?
Well, because they still need the data if they ever have to restore.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like they never need it, that they can put a bullet in it, but
Now,
they may need it.
Yeah, I would argue that the number one reason is that many people are using their backup system as an archive system, right? Which they shouldn't be, but whatever. Because
did you see that I called you out on that because I knew you were going to mention that?
Yeah. Because that's not what a backup system is really for, to get the spreadsheet from a year ago. That's not really what it's for. It's to restore the server the way it looks yesterday, right? If you had a decent archive system, you would be able to just give me all the versions of this spreadsheet over the last year. But so what's the problem with leaving it sitting around?
Well, it's probably powered up, connected to the network, and forgotten about.
Yeah.
Right? No one's touching. It's like that example you said of your VMS system, right? You're like, I don't have login. I don't know that system. I'm not touching it.
Yeah.
Right? Everyone, like your backup admins are probably going to forget about it because nothing's going to that, right? All your backups are going to your new infrastructure.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to always play with the shiny new toy.
Yeah. Shiny new toy. Exactly.
It's like squirrel.
But I told you my ADHD knock knock joke.
I don't think you have. Who's there?
ADHD. Squirrel. Anyway, so welcome to my
and
world.
so they get forgotten. And so Curtis, what's the problem when they're sort of left alone?
Security. Backup systems are already as like insecure is the wrong word. Not secure. Like, I don't know what the word used there. They already have enough security concerns, right?
Yeah.
Just as a production system that's actively being used. If it's like left in a corner and nobody's looking at it, that is a giant security hole waiting to happen, right?
Like, what sort of issues come about?
Well, I mean, we talked about, go back and listen to the Red Team episode with Dwayne about how much he uses the backup system as a target, to infiltrate an environment, right? So if you're not keeping up with the patches, you're not doing all that sort of stuff, and no one's watching it, right? You don't see weird stuff going on, right? If you're not seeing that stuff, then how are you going to know when somebody's doing something weird with your backup system? Go ahead.
The other thing also is, are people going and cleaning up agents that exist on all the systems that it was previously backing up?
Probably not, right? Yeah.
Right? So those are still out there, and if it has connectivity, then someone can misuse that as well.
Yeah, and I would say another big issue is cost. If you still need this system to restore your data, you are probably going to continue to pay for support for this system.
Yep.
So that you can continue to use it. Support for the boxes, support for the hardware, support for the disk, support for the tape, support for the backup software, you're paying all that support for a system that essentially is going unused the vast majority of the time. Yeah. And then the other thing I would say, and then we could segue into, you know, my other thought, which is the other thing is that backup system. I've already said this once, but I just say it in a different way. That backup systems are not designed for using it the way you want to use it, right? What you're looking for is a needle in the haystack. You're looking for the one file that you can't remember. You can't remember what server it was on. You can't remember what directory it was in. You just know there was a spreadsheet that maybe you remember that the spreadsheet was called Apollo, right?
Yeah.
But you don't remember what system it was on or whatever, right? Or you're looking for
That system may
emails.
not even be around anymore, right?
Yeah,
So
and we live in America, and in America, you also can get sued,
yeah,
and you can, if you've got that backup system around, and the tapes are still, even, by the way, even if the backup system is dead and what you have is a giant pile of tapes, that data
find
is
data.
discoverable, right?
Yeah.
In the US at least. So, and we don't do this a lot. For those that are listening, if this is your first podcast, we don't do this a lot, but
Mm.
this is what we ended up talking about today. This is why the company that I work for exists, which is S2 Data. And it's the one that you hear the promotion on it, the commercial in the beginning of the thing. Basically, we can take over that backup system. We can allow you to continue to get access to that data without having to do all the stuff that I talked about, because we have, in most cases, and when I say most cases, I mean like 98% of the backup software products that are out there, we have a way to access that data without needing the backup software. And this is whether it's on tape or disk. And we can basically assume control of we can do either two things. Either we can assume control of the media and put it in our vault. We have an actual vault that consists of a bank that we acquired, right? So we have an actual bank vault that we're now using as a tape vault. And we can take ownership of the media, whether it's disc or tape, and then basically inventory it all with this proprietary software we have called Trax, and get all the metadata and give you a web portal that is in the cloud, and you can search for and tell us whatever you're looking for, and then we can send you the data. But we can also do I would call that the Cadillac service. Less expensive if you want to do that, is you maintain access to the media, and then we give you some software that runs on a server that needs physical access to the media, and we do everything I just described. It's just you're managing the media.
Yeah.
And
And
go ahead.
when I think one of the things that sort of implicitly comes about with this solution, right, is the fact that that data is out of the like, at least the Cadillac version, it's out of
Yeah.
the customer's environment,
Yeah.
right? So if the customer gets hit version, it's out of the cyber attack,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
This is less data that is out there, less data that the customer also has to manage and worry
Yeah.
about. With the
Yeah. So in most cases, this is data it's offline data, right? And so literally there's no backup system that's running. There's nothing to attack, whether it's in the customer's environment or not. We're shutting down the net backup server. We're shutting down the, whatever server. Again, whatever product you've moved off of, and we support all of the different products. And it's funny, sometimes one day we're helping somebody move from, let's say networker to Commvault. Another day we're helping somebody move from Commvault to networker, right? Basically, the idea, the point is to solve the problems we talked about a few minutes ago. Kill that server, shut it down, get rid of that the security risk and the cost risk. Stop paying maintenance for something you're not using anymore, and then but don't lose access to the data. And also, and you can access it for e-discovery purposes or for just simple, we need this file. But also what we can do is you could say, look, the only thing we really want are exchange backups, whatever it is that you're looking for. The only thing we want is exchange backups. So we can go through, scan the backups, scan the metadata, and say, okay, these are the disks, these are the tapes that have this type of data, and then allow you to delete everything else, right? Which then reduces your risk. because again, if you have the data, you have to give it, right?
Which I think a lot of people don't realize. Keeping data around is as risky as not having the data.
Yeah. You could argue it's riskier. I mean, unless you have a
Regulatory
the
obligation.
regulatory reason to keep it. And if you have a regulatory reason to keep Exchange, that doesn't mean you got to keep everything else. Right?
Yep.
You should have segregated it up front, but you didn't. And now you want to get rid of everything but Exchange or whatever it is you want to keep. We can extract that data out and allow you to delete everything else, right? And we can do that for you as well, right? So keeping a backup system around after some sort of consolidation, like what we talked about in the first half, is a real risk. It's expensive. It's the reward is very, very little. The cost is very, very high. And I think I should probably put this first. The cyber risk is very, very high.
And real.
And very, very real. Yeah. S2 data can definitely help with that. If you're interested, check it out. S2data.com. S2data.com. Well, all new persona. Thanks for chatting.
No, this is a good episode. Yeah, there's still 3 more months left in the year. I'm wondering if there's going to be more consolidations.
Well, it's time when when I start getting asked for predictions for which is the worst thing I hate doing, but
yeah,
I predict there will be more data, and I predict that once again in 2025 there will be people that will lose data because they weren't backing up their stuff, especially stuff in the cloud.
Yep.
And we will continue to bring it to you here on the Backup Wrap Up. That is a wrap. The Backup Wrap Up is written, recorded, and produced by me, W. Curtis Preston. If you need backup or DR consulting, content generation, or expert witness work, check out backupcentral.com. You can also find links for my O'Reilly books on the same website. Remember, this is an independent podcast, and any opinions that you hear are those of the speaker and not necessarily an employer. Thanks for listening.